She was dragged to the auction block until a stranger raised his hand in defiance. The chains bit into her wrists like hungry teeth. Clara Whitmore stood on the wooden platform, dirt caked under her fingernails, hair tangled from 3 weeks of captivity. The morning sun burned her face raw, while men below called out numbers like she was livestock. $50, shouted a rancher with tobacco-stained teeth. 75, countered a saloon keeper, his eyes crawling over her torn dress. She kept her chin high. Her father had taught her that much before they killed him, before they burned the homestead, before they dragged her here to this godforsaken town where justice wore a badge but mercy had no voice. The auctioneer's hammer gleamed in the harsh light. Do I hear 100? Clara's eyes swept the crowd. Faces blurred together, greedy, cruel, indifferent. Then her gaze stopped on a figure at the back. A man in a black coat stood apart from the others. His hat shadowed his face, but she caught the glint of steel at his hip. Something in his stillness made her breath catch. 100, called the saloon keeper. His smile split wide as a wound. The stranger hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but Clara felt his attention like heat from a fire. Going once, the auctioneer sang out. His voice carried the practiced cheer of a man who sold human misery for profit. Going twice, $500. The words cut through the morning air like a blade. Every head turned. The stranger stepped forward, his boots echoing hollow on the packed earth. The crowd parted before him like water around a stone. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. $500. More money than most men saw in a year. More than she was worth to anyone with sense. The auctioneer's jaw worked soundlessly. The saloon keeper's face went red as fresh blood. Now see here, he sputtered. That ain't 500, the stranger repeated. His voice carried no emotion, but something in it made grown men step back. He reached into his coat and produced a roll of bills thick as a man's thumb. Cash money. The auctioneer's greed won over his confusion. Sold. The hammer fell like a gunshot. Clara watched the stranger approach the platform. Up close, she could see the hard lines around his eyes, the careful way he moved. A lawman's walk, or an outlaw's. In this territory, the difference was often just a badge. Name's Colt Brennan, he said quietly as the auctioneer unlocked her chains. His touch was gentle as he helped her down. Can you ride? She nodded, not trusting her voice. The crowd was dispersing, muttering among themselves. The saloon keeper shot them both a look that promised trouble. Good. Brennan led her toward 2 horses tied at the rail. We're leaving. Now. Clara's legs shook beneath her, but she forced them steady. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Brennan paused, his hand on the saddle horn. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or guilt, because some things ain't for sale. He boosted her onto the smaller horse, a bay mare with kind eyes. As Clara gathered the reins, she caught sight of movement in the crowd. 3 men in dusty coats were pushing through the dispersing buyers. Their leader wore a sheriff's badge, but his eyes held the cold gleam of a snake. Brennan, the sheriff called out, that's stolen property you're making off with. Brennan swung into his saddle without haste. Bill of sale says otherwise, Sheriff Harrow. Harrow's hand drifted toward his gun. That girl's wanted for murder. Killed her own kin in cold blood. The lie hit Clara like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to protest, but Brennan's voice cut her off. Then you'll have to prove it in court. He nudged his horse closer to hers. In the meantime, she's under my protection. Your protection don't mean much here, bounty hunter. The words hung in the air like smoke. Bounty hunter. Clara's blood turned to ice water. She jumped from the frying pan straight into the flames. Brennan's smile was thin as a knife blade. Maybe not, but my Colt .45 speaks loud enough. The 2 men stared at each other across 20 feet of dust and hatred. Clara could feel the violence coiling between them like a rattlesnake ready to strike. Then Harrow stepped back. Just 1 step, but it might as well have been a mile. This ain't over, Brennan. Never is, Brennan replied. He touched his hat brim in mock courtesy. Good day, Sheriff. They rode out slow, dignified, but Clara could feel eyes boring into her back like bullets. Once they cleared the town limits, Brennan spurred his horse to a canter. The desert stretched before them, endless and unforgiving. Behind them, dust devils danced where the town sat like a cancer on the horizon. Clara had thought the auction block was the end of her story. She was starting to realize it might just be the beginning. They rode in silence for an hour before Clara found her voice. The sun climbed higher, turning the air thick as molasses. Sweat traced lines through the dust on her face. "You're taking me back, aren't you?" she said. "For the bounty." Brennan didn't answer right away. His eyes swept the horizon, watching for dust clouds that might mean pursuit. "Depends." "On what?" "On whether you killed your family." The words hit her like a slap. Clara's hands tightened on the reins until her knuckles went white. "I didn't." "Then who did?" The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Clara stared at the desert ahead, where heat waves made the world shimmer like a mirage. She could tell him the truth. Risk everything on the word of a stranger who'd bought her like cattle. Or she could lie. Keep her secrets buried deep as her father's grave. "Sheriff Harrow," she whispered. Brennan's horse missed a step. He reined in, studying her face with eyes sharp as broken glass. "You're saying a lawman murdered your kin?" "Him and his boys. They wanted our land. The water rights." Clara's voice cracked like old leather. "Papa wouldn't sell. Said the ranch was all we had left to Mama." The memory rose up fresh as yesterday's pain. Her father standing on the porch, shotgun in his hands. Her brother Luke trying to calm him down. The sudden thunder of gunfire splitting the night. "They made it look like I did it," she continued. "Found me hiding in the root cellar, covered in blood. Their blood." Brennan was quiet for a long moment. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing across the empty land like a lost soul. "Why should I believe you?" he asked finally. Clara met his gaze. "Because you've seen Harrow's eyes. You know what kind of man he is." Something shifted in Brennan's expression. A crack in the armor. He wore like a second skin. "I've known killers who look like saints, and saints who look like killers. But you didn't ride away. You could have left me on that block. $500 is a lot of money. Not to a man like you." Clara leaned forward in her saddle. "I saw your face when he called me property. You've got principles, Mr. Brennan. Question is whether you've got the courage to follow them." A dust cloud appeared on the horizon behind them, small but growing. Brennan cursed under his breath and kicked his horse into a gallop. Riders coming. He called over the thunder of hooves. 3, maybe 4. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd known this moment would come. Had prayed it wouldn't, but prayer was a luxury for those with clean consciences. They rode hard across the broken country, horses lathered with sweat and foam. The sun beat down merciless as a hanging judge. Behind them, the dust cloud grew larger. Brennan led them into a maze of red rock canyons where the shadows ran deep and cool. Their horses' hooves rang against stone like church bells. He pulled up at a narrow gap between 2 towering walls. "We dismount here," he said. Walked them through quiet. The passage was barely wide enough for a horse. Clara's stirrups scraped against rock as they squeezed through. On the other side lay a hidden valley, green with grass and sweet water. "How did you know about this place?" Clara asked. "Spent some time here once. When I was running from something I couldn't outfight, they watered the horses and took shelter in the shade." Brennan checked his weapons with the methodical care of a man who'd lived by steel for too long. Clara watched his hands move, steady and sure. "What were you running from?" she asked. "The law. Same as you." He holstered his Colt and looked at her. "Difference is I was guilty." The confession hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Clara saw the weight he carried, heavy as iron shackles. Whatever he'd done, it had marked him deeper than any scar. "What changed?" she whispered. "Met someone who believed in second chances. She's buried in Denver now." The pain in his voice was raw as an open wound. Clara understood then why he'd stepped forward at the auction, why he'd paid a fortune for a stranger's freedom. He was trying to buy back his own soul. The sound of hooves echoed from the canyon mouth. Brennan pressed a finger to his lips and drew his gun. Through the narrow passage, Clara could see shadows moving. Harrow's voice carried on the still air. "Tracks lead this way. They can't have gone far." Clara held her breath. The bay mare nickered softly, and Brennan's hand moved to her muzzle. One sound would bring death, riding down on them like an avalanche. The shadows lingered, searched, then slowly withdrew. They waited until the sun touched the canyon rim, before moving again. When they finally emerged, the desert stretched empty in all directions. But Clara knew the peace wouldn't last. Harrow would be back, and next time he'd bring more men. They made camp that night in a grove of cottonwoods, beside a creek that whispered secrets to the stars. Brennan built a small fire, just enough for coffee and warmth against the desert's bite. Clara sat across from him, watching flames dance in his weathered face. "Tell me about her," she said quietly. "The woman in Denver." Brennan's hand stilled on his coffee cup. For a moment, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. And then the words came, slow and careful as a man walking on broken glass. Her name was Sarah Mackenzie. She ran a school for orphans near the railroad yards. He stared into the fire. "Prettiest thing you ever saw, but tough as nails when she needed to be." "How'd you meet?" "I was hunting a man. Bad one. He'd taken refuge in her school, threatened the children." Brennan's voice went hard. "I went in ready to burn the place down if I had to. She stopped me with nothing but words and a look that could melt stone." Clara pulled her knees to her chest. The firelight painted shadows that danced like ghosts around them. "What happened to her?" "Cholera. Took half the orphans, too." The words came out flat, drained of emotion. "I was tracking a bounty in Kansas when word reached me. By the time I got back, she was in the ground 3 weeks." The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared grief. Clara understood that kind of loss. The way it hollowed you out from the inside, left you walking around like an empty shell. "My brother Luke wanted to be a preacher," she said. "Used to practice sermons on the cattle. They'd just stand there chewing, patient as saints while he worked out the fire and brimstone." Brennan smiled. The first real one she'd seen from him. Sounded like a good man. "He was. Papa used to say Luke got all the goodness God meant for both of us." Clara's throat tightened. "Maybe if I'd been in the house that night instead of the barn, maybe I could have—" "No." Brennan's voice cut through her guilt like a knife. "That kind of thinking will kill you sure as any bullet." "I know." She looked at him across the dying fire. "Is that what you told yourself? After Sarah?" "Every day. Still do." He poured the dregs of his coffee into the flames. They hissed and spat like angry serpents. "Question is whether we let the guilt eat us alive, or use it to do something better." A coyote's howl drifted across the desert, lonely as a widow's prayer. Clara shivered despite the warmth from the fire. "What's your real plan, mister?" "Brennan, you can't keep running forever." "Can I?" But there was no conviction in his voice. "Maybe we head for California. Mexico. Somewhere Harrow's reach don't extend. And then what? Live like ghosts for the rest of our lives." Clara shook her head. "That's not living. That's just a slower way of dying." Brennan studied her face in the flickering light. "What are you suggesting?" "We go back. Face him down. Make him answer for what he's done. He's got a badge and a town full of people who'll swear he walks on water. We've got my word and yours. Which one you think a judge will believe? There might be others, people who know the truth but are too scared to speak." Clara leaned forward, urgency bleeding into her voice. "My family wasn't the first. There was the Hendersons last spring. The Clearys before that. All had land Harrow wanted. All died under mysterious circumstances. Something dangerous flickered in Brennan's eyes. How many? At least 6 families in 2 years. Maybe more. Clara felt the weight of all those graves. Someone has to stop him. Brennan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old decisions and older regrets. Sarah used to say that running from evil just gives it room to grow. Said sometimes a man has to plant his feet and draw a line. What did you tell her? That some fights ain't worth winning if the cost is too high. He met Clara's gaze. But maybe I was wrong about that. The fire crackled down to embers, painting their faces in red and shadow. Around them, the desert settled into its ancient silence, broken only by the whisper of wind through sage. There's something else, Clara said. Something I haven't told you. Brennan waited. The night they killed my family, I heard Harold talking to someone, a man with a voice like gravel. He called him Colonel. Brennan went very still. Described the voice. Deep, educated, like he was used to giving orders. Clara closed her eyes, remembering. He kept talking about the railroad's interests and clearing the obstacles. When she opened her eyes, Brennan's face had gone pale as bone. His hand rested on his gun, but fingers drumming a nervous rhythm. What is it? She asked. Colonel Marcus Thorne, retired cavalry, works for the Central Pacific now, clearing right away. Brennan's voice was barely above a whisper. He's the man I was hunting when I met Sarah, the one I never caught. The pieces fell into place like bullets, sliding into chambers. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. He's behind all of it, isn't he? The murders, the land grabbing, and Harrow's just his dog on a leash. Brennan stood and kicked dirt over the dying fire. We need to move. If Thorne's involved, Harrow won't give up easy. As they saddled the horses in darkness, Clara felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a shroud. They were riding toward something bigger than revenge now. They were riding toward a reckoning that had been 20 years in the making. They found the canyon at dawn, when the world was painted in shades of gold and blood. Brennan had chosen the place well. High walls on 3 sides, one narrow entrance, and clear fields of fire. If they were going to make their stand, this was where it would happen. Clara checked the rifle Brennan had given her. Her hand shook only a little. How many do you think he'll bring? All of them. Brennan's eyes never left the canyon mouth. Harrow's got maybe 8 deputies, plus whoever Thorne sends from a railroad. Those aren't good odds. No, they ain't. He looked at her, and she saw something she hadn't expected in his face. Peace. You sure about this? There's still time to run. Clara thought her father's grave, unmarked and forgotten, of Luke's dreams buried in the same cold ground, of all the families who died so rich men could get richer. I'm sure. They'd sent word through a traveling preacher. Meet at Devil's Canyon at noon if Harrow wanted her alive. Otherwise, the whole territory would hear about Colonel Thorne's business dealings. It wasn't much of a bluff, but it was all they had. The sun climbed higher. Sweat trickled down Clara's spine, despite the morning chill. Then she heard it, the distant thunder of hooves on hard ground. Here they come, Brennan said. A line of riders appeared at the canyon mouth. Harrow led them, his badge glinting like a fallen star. Behind him rode 8 men in dusty coats, hands resting easy on their guns. And at the back, straight as a ramrod on a black stallion, sat a man with silver hair and colonel's bearing. Marcus Thorne, the ghost from Brennan's past, made flesh at last. They rode in slow, confident, men who'd never lost a fight because they'd never fought fair. Harrow's voice carried across the still air. You've caused me considerable trouble, Brennan. Time to settle accounts. I'm listening, Brennan called back. The girl comes with us. You ride away. Simple as that. And if I refuse? Harrow's smile was cold as winter wind. Then we take her anyway, and you feed the buzzards. Colonel Thorne nudged his horse forward. When he spoke, His voice carried the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "Mr. Brennan, we meet at last. Not by choice. Indeed, you've been quite the thorn in my side over the years. Always one step behind, never quite fast enough." Thorn's eyes glittered with malice. "But persistence has its rewards. Here you are, trapped like a rat in a maze of your own making. Maybe you're the ones in the trap." Thorn laughed, the sound echoing off canyon walls like breaking glass. "With what army? You have one gun and a frightened girl. I have 10 seasoned killers." "Sometimes one gun's enough," Brennan said, "if it's in the right hands." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Clara felt the tension coiling between the two groups, tight as a watch spring. One wrong move, and the canyon would explode into violence. "Last chance, Brennan," Harrow called. "Walk away." Instead, Brennan stepped into the open. His hand hung loose at his side, fingers spread wide. The classic gunfighter's pose, carved from legend and bathed in blood. "I've got a counteroffer," he said. "You and me, Harrow. Just us. Winner takes all. You're loco if you think I'm fool enough for that." "Scared." The word hit like a slap. Harrow's face went red as fresh meat. Around him, his men shifted in their saddles. No lawman could back down from a challenge like that and keep his reputation. "I'll kill you," Harrow snarled. "Maybe. But everyone will know you had to face me alone to do it." Brennan's voice carried across the canyon like a funeral bell. "Question is whether you've got the sand for it." Harrow's hand dropped to his gun. "I've got sand enough." He swung down from his horse and walked forward, spurs jingling in the desert silence. Brennan met him halfway between the two groups. 20 feet of rocky ground where justice would be measured in fractions of seconds. Clara held her breath. Around her, the world seemed to slow and crystallize. Every grain of sand, every shadow, every heartbeat stretched out like eternity. The two men faced each other in the morning light, killer and lawman, hunter and hunted, both marked by violence, both carrying ghosts. "For Sarah," Brennan whispered. His hand moved like lightning. Harrow was fast, faster than Clara had expected, but Brennan was faster. His Colt cleared leather and spoke thunder while Harrow's gun was still rising. The sheriff staggered, looking down at the spreading red stain on his chest. His weapon fell from nerveless fingers. He took one step, then another, then toppled face first into the dust. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Colonel Thorne's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Kill them both." 9 guns cleared leather as one. Clara brought up her rifle, knowing it wouldn't be enough. Brennan dove for cover behind a boulder, his Colt already speaking again. The canyon exploded into chaos. Bullets whined off stone, raising sparks and dust. Clara fired, worked the lever, fired again. A deputy spun from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. But there were too many of them. Too many guns. Too much lead filling the air. She saw Brennan stumble, blood on his shirt. Saw him go down behind his rocky shelter. "Colt," she screamed. A bullet tugged at her dress. Another shattered stone near her head. The net was tightening, inevitable as death itself. Then she heard it, a sound that made her heart leap. The thunder of hooves, coming fast. A dozen riders poured into the canyon mouth, guns blazing. At their head rode a man with Federal Marshal's badge, his face grim as Judgment Day. "U.S. Marshal Service," he bellowed. "Throw down your weapons." The tide turned in an instant, caught between two fires. Thorne's men broke and ran. Some made it out of the canyon. Others didn't. Thorne himself sat his horse like a statue, hands raised, defeat written in every line of his face. Clara stumbled to where Brennan lay propped against the boulder. Blood seeped between his fingers where he pressed them to his side. "You're hurt," she said. "I've been worse." He managed a weak smile. "How'd you know to send for the marshals?" "I didn't." Clara looked up as the lead marshal approached. He was a weathered man with kind eyes and iron in his bearing. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I'm Marshal Tom Brennan. Colt's my brother." Clara stared at him, then at Colt, pieces clicking into place. "You sent word." "Before we left the Hidden Valley," Colt admitted. "Figured we might need backup if this went sideways. Always did think too much," Tom said, but his voice was warm with affection. He knelt beside his brother. "Letter said you finally found something worth fighting for." Colt looked at Clara, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Hope, fragile as desert flowers after rain. "Maybe I did," he said. The sun climbed toward its zenith, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and promise. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the desert, the sound of a changing world, of progress built on other men's graves. But for the first time in years, Clara Whitmore wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. She'd found her courage in the crucible of fire and lead, found a man willing to stand beside her when the whole world seemed against them. Some battles were worth fighting, no matter the cost. Some prices were worth paying for the chance to sleep clean. And sometimes when the smoke cleared and the dust settled, even the guilty could find redemption in the long shadow of justice.